Okay, well, in the interest of keeping on the schedule, we're going to get started. This is Dr. Ashton Carter, a Deputy Secretary of Defense, and Alex Stamos, who's the CISO of Yahoo. I'm John Jack. I'm a board partner at Andreessen Horowitz. I'm 59 years old. And yesterday I was reading the paper, listening to Frank Sinatra. And at the same time, I opened my mail, and I had, and this part's true. I was actually listening to a16z, but he wouldn't know that. So, I opened my mail, and I did have a new charge card from Visa as a result of the Home Depot breach. And as we've seen in the news, there's the Home Depot breach. There's the Target breach, which the cost to Target is now $236 million, direct costs and rising. And we know what happened to a few people's jobs there. And now we have J.P. Morgan Chase. So my first question to you, Ash, is what's going on?
I think that as long as I've been in the technology field, and then 5.5 years in the Department of Defense, and just to be clear, I'm the former Deputy Secretary of Defense as of a few months ago.
Oh, you were just promoted.
But we had all of our systems and our technology, and obviously NSA reported to me and all that. And I was consistently disappointed with our security, even though we spent an awful lot on it, and we're probably more aware than others. And as long as I've been in this field, I have had the feeling that this was an area in which demand was inadequately articulated, and so investments weren't being made. And year after year after year would go by. Now, I hate to see demand stimulated in this way through the Target thing, but I think it is the beginning of a wake-up call. That said, I think a lot of people at the top don't know what to do at that point. They have a big installed legacy base, a lot of that's old, and they may climb on top of that problem technically, and then they say, oh, geez, I didn't know about this SaaS and mobile and cloud and all these things that add a whole different layer to things. And then many of them, and this is especially true of small, not J.P. Morgan Chase, not Target, but go down a tier, they don't quite know why it could be detrimental to their business to be insecure. They understand the reputational part of it, but not necessarily the instrumental part. And these are real. One of the threats to them is real-world competitors elsewhere in the world who are stealing their intellectual property. So it's not a joke, and it's not really an abstract thing. But at any rate, the short answer to your question is I've been waiting for Godot here for many years. I certainly hope that this is the beginning of a wake-up call, but I'm skeptical.
Alex, are you awake?
Yes, I'm awake.
Okay.
So on the credit card issue, I think there's a micro and a macro. So the micro issue is we're on the verge of a transition away from the magstripe 16-digit credit card model. And just at the beginning of that transition, some bad guys figured out the real fundamental problem that the CIOs and the CISOs of these companies have, which is they have a huge physical plant with 50, 60, 70,000 deployed point of sale systems, many of which are still running Windows XP, and that are almost impossible to secure, right? And so you have kind of the micro issue of often in the security industry, the bad guys figured that out. They have a very notable success. And Target was the first success, and then you have the follow-on. And now with the EMV transition especially, these guys who have had probably access for a long period of time are trying to slam it through and make as much money as possible before EMV comes next year and NFC and all that stuff. The macro issue, as Dr. Carter said, the unfortunate truth is that if you look at the Fortune 500, I would say 470 of those companies are kind of screwed because they're playing at... What's happened is that the level of adversary has caught up to a level that's well beyond their ability to play. And so when you look at like the people who are okay shape are the big tech companies, because we have big, diverse teams. We have over 100 people on my team and a couple others working on security. And I have the ability to hire Windows kernel experts and reverse engineers and malware experts and people who, we write a bunch of our own software to go find malware and to manage systems. And I have the ability to hire those people and to keep them employed and interested. And then you have like the defense industrial base, and those guys can just throw money at the problem. But for everybody else, and the banks, right? The banks can throw money at the problem. No, it's just, they can hire good people. They have a ton of money. They're able to spend it on product. But outside of that, like if you're just a industrial company in the Midwest and you have 5,000 employees and a couple $2 billion in revenue, it used to be that security was, you keep the viruses off the network and stuff. And now it's that you have a competitor in China or Russia or another developing country where there's a loose line between the government and industry, and all of a sudden you're facing people who've been trained by those countries' intelligence agencies from an industrial espionage perspective, who have cut their teeth breaking into Lockheed and Northrop Grumman and Google, are now turning to Midwest industrial manufacturer. And those guys are really in trouble, because as an industry we don't have much to give them, because they can either build the people like we can, or they can't spend the budget like the banks and the defense industrial complex can.
So it sounds a little scary. So if you think about one of the theses of Andreessen Horowitz is that software is eating the world, meaning that there's more and more software deployed to disrupt current industry, or what I tell CIOs and CISOs is software is essentially the manifestation of your competitive advantage. You build software in order to keep your business ahead of your competitors. So we have a new class of bad actors who know how to go after anywhere from the largest enterprises down to small, medium enterprise. Yet we have a continued need to publish more software in order to maintain a competitive advantage. And with more software, we have more attack surface. So what would you say to the CMOs and CIOs in this room about how to think about the problem and think about what to do, given that CMOs are more concerned about the brand and reputation, and CIOs, of course, often have the CISO reporting to him or her, or side by side? It's a big problem. What guidance would you give? I'll go to Alex first.
Yeah, for the CIOs, you said the magic words attack surface, right? So attack surface is you imagining what's a company look like to the outside to a bad guy. Or what's a piece of software look like. And attack surface minimization is by far the cheapest and most effective way to reduce your security risk. It's the reason why Microsoft has spent probably $1 billion on security in the last decade, and they still haven't gone anywhere. It's because they're not willing to do attack surface minimization due to the way they do backwards compatibility. And so if you're a CIO, one, move to the cloud. Who here works at Microsoft? Great, nobody? Nobody in this room is qualified to run Exchange at their enterprise. No CIO in here is qualified to run Exchange, right? Like if there's anything the cloud and kind of the DevOps revolution has taught us, it's that things are way more secure if you write the software and you operate it yourself. So moving to the cloud, into trusted cloud providers who are doing a good job for all of the functions where you're not writing your own software, I think is the best way to reduce attack surface. And for the CMOs, engage on security issues before it's an emergency, right? The problem is for most companies, they only trot the CISO out to be the sacrificial lamb, to have their head chopped off in public after there's and that's one, as like my union rep says, that's not a good thing for CISOs overall, but also it's a lost opportunity for companies to engage the press and engage their users to talk about positive things about security and to build up some trust. Because the truth is, we're all going to have security incidents. If you only talk about security when it's a bad thing, you have no ability, you have nothing built in with reporters and the people who give quotes and the experts in the field to rely upon when the bad things happen. So get more proactive about talking about positive things about security and how users can keep themselves safe. So when the bad day happens, that you've got a little bit of a cushion.
Ash?
I agree with everything Alex said, and he has a company that has capabilities. Not all companies can do what they do, or not all companies have an Alex Stamos working for them, and they're not going to. So the challenge for the what I'll call sort of more average company with a big installed legacy base and a kind of IT department. Is how do you, as you look out, and I talked about the market, what is the supply chain look like for security? It's hugely fragmented. There are lots of, you have to have this and you have to have that. We all know what all the pieces of an overall security architecture is, depending upon what you're trying to protect and the attack surfaces that you're dealing with. But it falls on the company and its own staff to assemble that architecture. And so somebody's going to make a hell of a lot of money who figures out how to brand that architecture and can credibly say, I'll put together an architecture for you, non-tech company, as good as the one Alex is going to put together for a tech company. And here's how you'll know it's good. Right now, they're having to do it themselves, and they got 10 vendors coming in with pieces of it, and they're trying to put these pieces of the puzzle, and they're just not capable of doing it. It's a very hard thing to do intellectually to do, and the IT departments aren't up to it.
Do the CMOs in the room have to change their mindset around security in this regard? So for the past 12 years when I've been in this industry and I have a successful sale to a big financial services firm, the first thing they tell me is, you'll never use my name, it better not appear on your website, will never be a reference, this is top secret stuff. Is the landscape changing where, to your point of being proactive means that companies should talk about their security strategy so they're out in front of it?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the idea that the bad guys are getting the information from public sources, like they know what your info is. The truth is, I think one of the things CMOs need to realize, I think CIOs hopefully get at this point, a breach isn't just a breach is a breach, right? Like we have this idea that if any machine gets broken into, it's the same as 100 million credit card numbers being stolen. The truth is, for any reasonably large enterprise, every day your security team is running 2 or 3 or 4 security incidents. That's malware dropping on somebody's machine, somebody who was tricked and phished, that was an external machine that didn't get patched and got compromised. That's just day to day for us, right? And so I think CMOs need to realize that there's kind of a give and take in security that happens, and it's important to talk about the fact that if, we, for example, had a security incident just a couple weeks ago where we had 3 machines broken into, and there was a young man who's trying to make a name for himself by publicizing this, and it's a big deal, and we're glad that these machines were found and caught, but because of the way we build things, there was no user impact, there's no user data impact, and it was important for us to kind of go out and publicly say, this is what this means, and we could do that because we talk about our security model openly, and so I totally agree that you need to go out and talk about that because the bad guys know, no enterprise with more than a couple dozen people is going to keep the bad guys from first getting a foothold in their network. That's impossible. It's about what happens after that, so there's no real loss to talking about your security plans.
Ash, Director Comey of the FBI said, everyone is owned by the Chinese. What did you think of that statement? And I don't think he meant like equity ownership.
No, he didn't. And I think Jim Comey is basically telling the truth. The Chinese government-sponsored and at kind of one arm's length proxy IT aggressor services are large, they're smart, and they're largely unopposed in this country. So I think that I'll tell you, JJ, I even felt this way about our networks in the Defense Department. And if anybody thinks that we did a very good job of protecting defense networks, take a look at Edward Snowden. A classic, whatever you think of that, it was a classic insider threat realized to the huge detriment of the country. They are. I always felt had penetrated the government networks. We know and we see all the time them, and they're small. They go after little companies that make a little component. A specialty component with a specialty alloy or something, or a paint that it took somebody somewhere in this country decades to perfect that formula, and they steal that formula and thereby overnight become a competitor for a company. It's serious business.
It also allows them to get into the supply chain. So if they can break into that little paint supplier's systems, they can get into the supply chain and worm their way up to where they might want to get to. Alex, what do you think about, you touched on it a little bit, again for the CMOs in the room, how do you make a decision what to talk about if indeed you have been breached? I mean, there's two extremes, right? There's the 1 machine or 3 machine example you have, and then 100 million credit cards. But what about that area in the middle? How do you think about that?
Yeah, unfortunately, it seems like most of those decisions are made by lawyers, right? Who are all about, we're going to hide as much information as possible because we're not going to give it out. Obviously, each one of these breaches comes with its own special set of shareholder lawsuits and user class actions. There's a Shakespeare quote that I think is relevant here that I'm not going to repeat, but you can guess what it is. But letting the lawyers make the decisions by default, I think, is not great. I mean, obviously, having your general counsel and your legal team part of it is totally critical, but that's why you have to have that discussion with them ahead of time. And I think wargaming this out is actually not an unreasonable thing.
Yeah.
To sit and do a tabletop exercise, and there are consulting companies that do this, or you can just do it on your own with your own security team, where you could wargame out with your CMO, with your general counsel, with your law enforcement team, the people who do all the investor relations and securities law, and game out, like, what would we do in this scenario so that you're not making the decision in a 4-hour window.
I just add one thing that is another dimension of this that I think bears mentioning. It came up this morning, and when folks were talking about the two-way nature of a transaction in which I share data with an enterprise and the need to give back, and therefore the question of trust and the personal cost associated with being active on the network. I think that's another dimension of security. It's not about bad guys hacking in and stealing things, but it is about trust and reputation in a certain sense. I think these two things are kind of going to come together. I think people, not malefactors, but people are going to be more demanding that they understand what is being done with their information, that it's not going off somewhere, not China necessarily, but off in somewhere where they can't control it and aren't getting anything back. So I think from the point of view of the corporation leadership, those two things they're somewhat separate, but operationally they overlap quite a bit.
On a thread there is, what is the role of the government and commercial enterprise in sharing information about threats? Okay, we have some pockets of success there. We have FSISAC, you could argue, has a pocket of success, but why isn't there just the government shares everything they know, every commercial enterprise shares everything they know, except for the lawyers, everything they know, and we have this universal knowledge base of bad behavior?
Well, there's more going on there than you might think, but a lot less than there should be. So now the question is why? And these are not excuses to me, they're explanations. There's no excuse. But the explanations are that a lot of the threat information that the government collects in the counterintelligence area, counterterrorism, protect our own networks area, some of it's germane, but a lot of it is not really germane to these commercial attacks. Said differently, the government isn't collecting a lot of information about these attacks. That's thing one. Thing two, which is less acceptable, is in the U.S. federal government has still not made a decision in the manner of cyber defense of the kind that it had to make in the area of counterterrorism, which is this an attack, a crime, or a disaster? Now, why does that matter? Because it's all three. If it's an attack, then you expect your defense establishment to take care of it. If it's a crime, then you expect your law enforcement establishment to take care of it. And if it's a disaster, then you expect your Homeland Security apparatus to take. And so there's been this sort of threefold struggle over this. And you add a huge layer of lawyering, government lawyering, even worse, on top of that. And you have stasis and paralysis. So even what that's another way of saying, JJ, is that even that which is collected and could profitably shared is inadequately shared because of those basically trivial bureaucratic.
Can we break that logjam?
Yeah, I think that we've got to. And the I think you see Jim Comey actually trying to do that. And my attitude, when I was representing the Defense Department to Jim and his predecessor, Bob Mueller, is my attitude was, I'm not going to try to claim this. Go for it. And I'm 100% behind you. I could never get Homeland Security, quite honestly, because I thought they had the attitude that they wanted this bureaucratically. I mean, all bureaucracies want things. And they wanted this, but they didn't have the capability. Comey had the authorities and some reasonable technical capability. We had a lot of technical capability, but I didn't feel like we were the right people to do it. So my attitude is, this is a national problem. Let me just get in behind Jim and tell all my bureaucrats to stuff it and stop fighting with him and trying to seize it yourself. But I never got Homeland Security to that point of view.
We better talk to them. What's the corporate view on the sharing and collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, we'd like to collaborate more on the national intelligence threats. It feels like it's a one-way, that we send data to the government and they say thank you. And we talk to these folks, and it's not like they're being malicious. The problem is kind of overclassification, right? That you'll have a source or a method that gives them data that's useful, and then everything that touches becomes classified. And then the process to get this stuff from, if it's SCI, compartmentalized information, to get that declassified to be able to share with us, like completely, to the no foreign level or something, is extremely hard. Even though, I have employees who have TS/SCI clearances, who have the ability to work with the government, but then we can't take data that then we can't use elsewhere, right? And so for me to be able to take an IP address to put it into my Splunk search has to be declassified, and there's no real good process for that. And so most of the data sharing that happens that's useful for us is between us and our partner companies. FSISAC is a great example of how the banks have done that. We're a member of FSISAC because we do billions of dollars in credit card transactions. And I think that's great. I think the tech industry needs to do that. I mean, it's a little harder for us legally. The banks basically have no privacy laws, which is how credit unions exist and stuff. So they can just take all of your information and share it. That's not true for us with ECBA and a couple other laws. And I think that's fine that those laws exist, but we need to figure out like the legal framework that allows us to share information in real time to be able to say, this Android phone that has malware on it is pretending to be other users on Google, Facebook, Twitter, and Yahoo at the same time. It'd be great for us, instead of each one of us determining that separately, that one of us figures it out and then that person's locked out from the rest.
Okay, well, we have 8 more minutes and 11 seconds. And what I'd like to do is ask you each a question that's very specific to your domain and not necessarily completely on topic.
Great.
Alex, I'd like to ask you, as individuals in this room, how do we think about our own personal security, cybersecurity?
So the kind of inconvenient truth of the tech industry right now is that there's pretty much nothing a individual person can do to be safe online if they're targeted by a bad guy. And the way we can tell this for sure is from the iCloud hack. So we've talked about Target and Home Depot, which has 100 million of credit card numbers, but who really cares, right? Like lots of people get their credit card numbers changed, and Target loses a couple percentage point of their market cap, but the human impact of that is minimal. Whereas with the iCloud photo leak, we have dozens of celebrities with their most intimate videos and photos being on the internet. And the first reaction from a lot of people in the tech industry was like, oh, well, you shouldn't take naked pictures of yourself on your camera, which is like a totally reasonable thing to tell your teenagers, right? But it's not an appropriate reaction from the tech industry. And the truth is that all of this technology in our lives, we've built this huge edifice that is completely unsupported by the fact that if you are targeted by a bad guy, they're going to get in, right? Either they're just going to buy your username and password off the black market from a third-party breach, or then they're going to step up to doing a spear phishing attack of you, or they're going to do password reset questions, which are, if they research any individual, you can get somebody's credit report, which you can purchase from ChoicePoint or something like that, or they'll go and put malware on your personal machine, right? And so that's a real problem for the tech industry. And so, I mean, the best things people can do is they can protect themselves against kind of the mass takeover, which means you need to use a different password every single site. You need to turn 2-factor authentication on everywhere. That probably means using a password management tool like a LastPass or Dashlane or 1Password. But beyond that, it's incumbent on us to, the next 5 years, we need to redesign how technology works so people are safe if they're targeted, not just that they're lucky.
Okay, I was kind of hoping for like this magic, just do this, but...
I mean, right. You could join the Amish and raise barns all day. I mean, that's honestly the safest thing.
Okay.
That's what I'm working on the beer.
Yeah,
for.
you got it going there pretty good. Ash, while we have you on stage, a little bit higher level than cybersecurity is national security. And I'm just curious on your views on all that's going on in the Middle East and what's the path from here?
I'll say something that might surprise you, which is that, yes, the Middle East is very important. I fought 2 wars there, Iraq and Afghanistan. Bin Laden, lots of things have been going on there, and likewise with Russia, Putin, Ukraine, and so forth. But if you step back a little bit from those and you say, what would really be consequential for us as a country and us in this industry writ large, your eyes have to go back to East Asia, where for 70 years, largely because of the United States, there's been stability and prosperity. That's the environment in which Japan first rose and prospered, and then South Korea, and then Southeast Asia, and today China and India. And that's a great thing. And it's a huge asset to our world and to humanity and to those people. But it is also a region in where the wounds of World War II never healed. They all hate each other, if you haven't noticed. And the United States has been kind of a counterweight to that and a balance wheel. And the rise of China is okay, and I'm not one of these people who believes that conflict with China or a Cold War with China is inevitable. It's certainly highly undesirable. But you don't get what you want in this life just by wanting it. We have to work at that result. And there is a tendency in Chinese strategic thinking, and you hear it in Xi Jinping, to be a little, now's our place in the sun, our time to shine, and so within bounds, that's okay. When it shades into hubris and risk-taking, it's a problem. And I just say that because that could ruin everything. Putin can't ruin everything. And ISIS can't ruin everything. That could ruin everything. The other thing I came to mind, which is very important to me personally, and I'm kind of devoting myself to now, and this has been mentioned several times in this room, and that is the ability of our people in the United States to partake of the digital economy. Do they have the skills to do that? Do they have to succeed? And because our business success will depend upon their ability to do that, and the social cohesion of the country will depend upon the sensation that the American dream isn't just a dream, and that the escalator is still there. And once again, that's not something you can just take for granted generation after generation. We have to work on it and say, well, what is that going to mean in this new world? It's not going to mean what it meant for our parents. It's going to mean something different, but there has to be that sense that you can get ahead by, and that the system is fair and gives you a chance, and that we have the best workers, therefore, top flight industry and so forth. And I think there are enough worrisome indicators there that it's something we need to take seriously about, because you're leaders of the society here, leading into this new future. I think we have to have a philosophy towards that, and I'm now, having left defense, and I don't have that to preoccupy me anymore. I'm turning myself to that puzzle. I don't have the answer to it, but I think it's something that I'm thinking about.
So interesting perspective. You're saying that part of the way to think about this is very inwardly focused, right? Is our own world we live in that we drive, versus just thinking about how we can quell the enemy on their turf, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to have the luxury of saying everything's okay here and we'll still have all the technology and the money that we need to defend ourselves, and be the best and so forth. But you can't take that for granted in defense any more than you can take it for granted in any other field of technology. Other people are good, they're smart, they're working on their development of their own people and their own technology, and that's fine. It's fair, but I want us to be doing that for ourselves too.
Great. Well, thank you both very much.